Hey Atareh, welcome to the WalletFrens show. Happy to have you on. Thanks for taking time out while you're traveling and catching up. Good to have you on, man.
Yeah,
How's
yeah.
good?
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for inviting me. It's yeah, it's a little hectic when you're moving between places, but I'm glad we got the time.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, I mean to give some context about what is this about and like the conversation, it's called WalletFrens. So idea is we've all of us have made our wallets and started creating our identities on chain through buying our assets, NFTs, and everything. And so basically, it's a conversational series where a bunch of builders, content creators who've been building in the space, and we kind of get together and talk about different perspectives. So I have a question to start off with. So what has been your wallet story? Like what was the first thing? When did you make your first wallet? What is the first thing you bought, and what is the first NFT you bought?
Yeah, that's a great question to start off with. So, my first wallet was in late 2017. I don't know where that is or what the seed for that is, but I know that the altcoins are, if I could swear, S coins, shit coins that I bought. You can edit that if you need to. that I bought went to zero, and I should have bought more Ethereum and Bitcoin, obviously, like many people. And then that kind of actually burned me on crypto for a little bit, where I was like, oh, this place is weird. I had lost, I think, like a few $100 transferring Ethereum to the wrong chain at some point. So, the learning curves, the learning by fire. And then it was 2020 is when I discovered NFTs. I bought my first NFT in October of 2020. And this was actually on Foundation. So not many people know this, but Foundation wasn't just auctions before. They also had
Yeah.
this, and I'm sure you know this, they had this time period where they're doing like almost like bonding curves on addition. So it's like you would buy a piece at $100, and then as more people bought, the price of that addition would automatically just increase, and then you'd be able to sell that at a higher price. And so that's the first NFT that I bought. It was by an artist, I believe it was Malavita. That was the artist, and from then I got a lot of my artists on NFTs and artist friends on NFTs, and we went from there.
That's very interesting. I think one common thing which I've been also seeing is a lot of people got into the space in like 2017, 2018 era, and then they went through that whole burning your hands phase. But somehow those who stuck through are the ones who are like now made it and kind of in the game, right? So like even for me, when I first made my wallet, it was just about I think there was this thing called Bitfinex, and like there was all these like exchanges which I don't even know, some of them don't even exist right now, but it was just very interesting and scary too, right? Like just buying something on something, and you don't even know the seed phrase and like what to do with it and all of that. And from that point in time to NFTs, and I think October 2020 is quite I think relatively early for the people who got into NFTs. So just curious to know how did you even discover NFTs, right? I think okay, you bought it in 2018. You maybe had some shit coins, but were you there throughout that journey, or was it something that piqued your interest and again got back into the space? How was it?
It was definitely the latter, where there was that, let's say, breakup, and then it was in 2020. It was living with a roommate, and he started talking about NFTs, and he'd been in crypto about the same time as me, and in 2020 he started a few months before me to get back into it, and he started talking about this thing called Foundation, and he was like, check this out, this is really interesting. And for me, I honestly, a lot of people have that initial phase of NFTs, like, oh, that's weird, it's a photo on the internet, it's a scam. But for me, I didn't have that initial buffer. For me, it just clicked. I'm like, oh, that makes complete sense, because I went down to like just first principles, and I thought about it, and I'm like, what is a Mona Lisa painting? And I'm like, it's canvas, it's a frame, and it's paint, and it's aged, but it's the provenance, it's the artist, and it's the story around the artist. That's the value. And if you can do that online and that's digital, then that makes complete sense. So I never had that initial phase of like trying to convince people, have to convince me of what an NFT is and why it's going to be valuable. To me, it just made sense from that point. So yeah.
That's quite interesting, because I think even with what NFTs are itself has kind of taken different kinds of forms and shape even during this period, right? Like when I first got to know about it, I thought it was, so my first NFT was this. So during that time there was COVID happening, and there was a project which did like for COVID relief. It put out an NFT project, and then they were like raising funds through that. And then it was a way for artists collating some money and kind of putting it to COVID relief. So that was very interesting. So I thought like, okay, now this is an interesting use case. So I knew like it was more like a charity thing. But then I realized like, okay, this is something that's an art piece that I'm getting. This is 20 artists have come together, collaborated and created this piece, and this is there. And this is something very interesting, which is going to stay with me. And somewhere down the line, I think that's how I started it. But then I got to know about these collectibles and like, you know, the whole flipping aspect, and like kind of the whole meta kept changing all throughout, right? Initially, there was a lot of people who just knew that you had to collect it, but then came this element about flipping, and I think making like a quote unquote a job out of it, or a profession out of it by flipping these NFTs, and then there are all these other different avenues which you could be playing as a role within the NFT ecosystem, whether that's like a creator yourself or collaborating with projects. So just curious, like what was your like what did you think you would do, like 2020 you're buying this, or maybe even like how did your perspective change from how did you look at them? Like, were they always like you knew that you had to flip them and kind of do that, or like, and what about rest of the things?
I think the aspect of like knowing I have to flip them, that one, like I understood that aspect of it, but like the actual strategy behind it took some time, I think, right? Like of why does one go up and why does one go down, and why does one gain traction and the other one doesn't. That, as I got more into the ecosystem and I understood, you know, the role that Twitter played in all of that, and you know, groups and then influencers and all that, then obviously I started to mature a little bit more. And then the first question, or the first part of the question was, what did you think my role was going to be in this ecosystem? Is that right?
Yeah.
So for that, I honestly, I didn't know. I didn't think that I'd be full time in this space. When I was in it initially, I was in it to, you know, just flip and go with the flow. But the more I think got involved in the space, the more I, you know, got into projects. Part of me was like, I'm like, I can do this, and the other part of it was like, well, do I want to do it, or is there something else that I want to do for this ecosystem and for this space? And so I was intentional when I went full time. It was exactly a year and maybe 2 weeks ago now that I went full time into Web3, where I made it a goal to say I'm going to create content and I'm going to write in this space, in the specific NFT space, and I'm going to build, you know, my Twitter following and create distribution, and I've been successful at that, and I think I'm just getting started. I still have so much that I want to do that I'm going to be doing. So it's still the very beginning of the journey for me, even though it's a year in. And it feels like a lot longer because, as we know, NFT time is very skewed. But that's a little bit of how I think about my involvement in the space.
So were you a writer, or were you a kind of content creator before this, or this is something which you felt passionate enough to wanting to do about this now?
So I was not a content creator nor a writer. I was a product person. So I was head of product for a Web2 startup, and it was in the pharma space, and a software pharmacy. So like it was essentially Shopify for direct-to-consumer brands that wanted to go online and sell direct-to-consumer through their like have a pharmacy, doctors, etc., like all in one system. So I was helping build that and leading the team there. But what I found, and a lot of I think my insights onto what I actually want to do came from flying away and going to Miami for like a few months and just spending time by myself there while still working. And I learned a lot about myself, I think, when I got separation from just my normal routine, my normal friends, my family, everybody. And I realized that no matter where I went, in whatever role that I was doing, I somehow would always fall back into writing. And I think when I would write in those times, I would think back and I would reflect. I would really, like, I take a lot of joy in crafting the right sentence and the perfect paragraph to tell the story that really hits. And I realized that there's something to that I shouldn't ignore that, and that I've never actually tried doing that full time. So what if I gave that a shot? Because I think all the other things that I was doing, I would find myself, I would excel at it, but then I would always hit a point where I would burn out. I would need to take a bit of a break, get that energy back, and then continue. And I felt like that wasn't necessarily, I was like, that can't be all there is to it. Like there must be something more to life than just this. And so that's how I learned, and I just tried it. I didn't know that it was going to work, but I thought about it, and people did say in the past when I wrote things, they're like, that was a really good read, or hey, you're good at that. So I kind of just went back to that, and I thought about that a little bit more, and I'm like, okay, like there could be something here. Try it full time.
That's very interesting because I think one thing which I observed in Web3, which I wasn't so obvious, like in other companies too, like I think writing inherently has an aspect of clarity of thought, right? Like I think that element of it is so much more valuable, and so like the fundamental difference which I've seen in terms of like the companies which are built in like kind of Web 2 and Web 3, the whole thesis, like I think I was listening to some investor conversation and they were talking about like PMF and kind of these things. And one interesting topic came about where we are so early in the overall market cycle of this space that at this point in time, like even if you go back 2000, like 8 and like the first phase of like 20 till about 2017, right? That was a time where it was just ideas. It was just people were betting on just these ideas that, you know, this could happen. And I think that, interestingly, all of them started with white paper. White paper is a very interesting phenomena, and it's a very interesting terminology if you just look at it, right? Like basically you're just saying it's a plain blank sheet of paper on which we are writing this future in some sense, and I think we are imagining that so and so thing could happen, and then we're going about building this thing. And Vitalik, for that matter, was when he started off was like basically writing about Bitcoin and kind of putting out these thoughts. And what's very interesting is the people who have built a lot of leverage in this space have been people who have been writers, whether that is writers becoming builders, writers becoming, I think even like Cooper Trooper for that matter, or content creators like such as yourself. And so I'm kind of curious, is that the element about like I think 2-3 different things come up to my mind. One is like, okay, there is a clarity of thought, and then there is a second thing which is about visioning something, right? Like you envision so and so thing could happen, and then like you put out these ideas and people pick up these ideas and build it up, or and then the third element is about the medium itself which we use. Like largely Twitter is where people audience lie, and like text being that format which is kind of optimized for, and then the leverage that you end up building there is basically what matters most. So just curious, like of all these elements, like what do you think, like why writing is like being a leverage so much according to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's one of those when you actually boil it down, right? Let's say it's a video that you want to make, what elements make up a great video? It's not the background of the video or the quality of your camera, or like your voice matters, but like it's and the quality of the audio equipment, but it's not the end all be all. there's a lot that goes into it, and when you think about it, it comes down to like, well, what are you saying? What's your message, right? I think with any medium that you have, its very center is writing, like, because and with any medium, what you're trying to do is from one human to another, you're trying to translate an idea, a thought, a feeling, and you're only as good as that as your ability to formulate the thoughts, feelings that you have in your brain into words that resonates with the other person, and so that what you feel inside or what you think inside is transferred to them. And then it comes into the medium, right? The medium is podcasting. Okay, so that's words. That's the words you use primarily yet, right? Video, it's words and video. But again, it's the message in that. And then I think the purest form of content creation is writing. Humans have been doing it for, thousands and thousands of years. It's how we've transferred knowledge from one generation to the other. And a lot of what we have right now is because we learned how to speak and write and document. So I think there's something really, really fundamental to writing, and to get good at that is what you said. I think it allows you to clarify what's going on in your head, because our brains are going, I think, a mile a minute. And I think especially in today's society, where a lot of young people have, TikTok, and like I'm on TikTok as well, and like you can see the effects of like it, where 1 second, if it's not good enough, next, and that kind of like, I think short-term reward system doesn't necessarily allow people to, I think, sit down and get good at one thing, because you can get cheaper dopamine by just going on TikTok or doing something much short-term. And so I think that I think despite all that, if you are able to write well, people will pay attention, because there's something gripping about like the sentence, and you're like, okay, but what happens next? That's this innate part of like your being that wants to know what happens on the next page. And so I feel like it's all like these elements that wrap up into why writing will always be relevant.
You touched upon a very interesting point for me. Like, I think the storytelling aspect of it, right? I think culturally in Web3, like incidentally, I was just there was a meme about Vitalik that was going around yesterday.
I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, and then like I ended up going to his profile, and then I saw his bio, and I found one thing very interesting. His bio is actually a link to a video. It's a story about a dragon, and then there are these villagers, and like the whole story about how these villagers come to accept this dragon as a reality that exists in this world, and they kind of build their whole world towards it. But then comes in another person who starts questioning it, and then kind of starts inspiring people to invest in this direction, and they eventually end up investing enough to doing that, and at the end of it come to this realization that yes, we should have done this like much earlier. Now this is some fable, some story which was told, but I think when Vitalik puts it in his bio, he's giving a narrative about Ethereum in some sense, right? I might be inferring here, I might be reading into words, but I think, but one thing which I've kind of consistently seen in this space is a powerful usage of storytelling, right? I think whether that is like I was part of Kernel, and there are amazing ways in which stories are used to communicate information or ideas. And I think inherently as human beings, like storytelling is something which is very, very critical, the way we shape our perspectives. I found this like way more used in Web3 than like kind of typical companies or products before. So just curious about like, why do you think like storytelling is like so much centered in this space compared to those things, and then also about how do you look at like what role like storytelling like plays in this in the overall, like I think general company building, product building, community building, and maybe specifically Web3?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts of this. One is that I would say that I've seen a lot of storytelling in Web 2, maybe not necessarily because I think Web 2 is so broad now. When you say Web 2, like what does that mean? There's so many things in Web 2.
It's everything else.
it's exactly, it's everything else before Web 3 is kind of how it's being categorized. But I think a lot of the companies raised money on a story, right? It's Uber raised money, a bunch of money on a story, and of course they were executing while they were doing some of the other rounds, but it was still the story of the future. And I think when you look at any pitch deck, even if you saw the Yuga pitch deck that leaked a few months ago, it centers on a story and painting a vision for the future of what it could be if you decide to act today. And so I think it's I go back to one of the early threads that I wrote about 10KTF, where I talk about Pixar and how Pixar, they're masters of storytelling. Every movie they do does numbers at the box office. They're consistently on top, and they're not just big box office. They're also highly rated. People love them deeply, and their magic is storytelling. They've understood that this is this concept that humans are just naturally drawn to no matter what, and that if you can tell a good story, you'll capture attention, and if you capture attention, you will inevitably capture value. And so I think whether in your Web 2 or Web 3, you need to be telling a story. I actually think that a lot of Web 3, specifically NFT brands, haven't caught up to that, and they don't actually try to tell a story. They're just like, here's my mint, here's an art, go do something with it, and they hope that people will degen. But I think those days are done. There's a project that I'm in right now, and I was just featured as one of the first 3 captains, which I'm still writing that, and I'm very humbled by that. But they were the original storytellers in Web3, I would say. Their NFT project started with story at its core, and they built everything week over week on a story. And I think now what we're seeing, and one of my co-hosts on a show that I do, maybe Neda, she said this last week. She said, I think what we're going to see is every other NFT project is going to see the success 10KTF has with their storytelling. And now you can actually see it in real time. Everybody's trying to kind of hide or put story in the middle of their project and say, oh, by the way, we are telling a story too, look at us. But I think it needs to be something really deep and innate and to your ethos. And I think that's why it resonates with people, because it's everything is a story that needs to be told. It's like your life when you tell people who you are, you're telling a story right there, right? And that captivates people.
You're talking about 10KFT here, right?
Yes, exactly. 10KTF.
So 10KTF, I think I initially came across this project maybe a few months ago, and I found it very interesting. There was just this picture, and then there are some little clues here and there, and I haven't really deep dived into the project, but I recently saw you posting a little bit about. So maybe do you want to talk a little bit about what it is and what elements of storytelling, or can you just double tap a little bit on that aspect of storytelling?
Of course. So last September in 2021, a project launched, and it's told the story of an old Japanese man living in New Tokyo, which is a mythical city in the metaverse. And he was an artisan, and he was a craftsman. And he was initially offering shoes and backpacks that you could get your PFP on it. So it was the Bored Apes, Cool Cats, Mutant Apes, World of Women's, Onis, and a bunch more. And initially for me, I'm like, do I want to just waste 0.05 ETH on this? Because I feel like this is just a one-off. I buy this and then they're like, here's a cool photo, and then they don't do anything with it. That was legitimately my initial thought about the project. And so I contemplated minting or not. And then I started seeing people post about it and tweet about it. And he doesn't do that about just anything, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, so he's probably involved. I actually went into Beeple's server on Discord, and I just asked the community, I'm like, I keep seeing people post about this. Do you guys have any idea what his involvement is, if any? And not even 3 seconds later, Beeple responds with just 4 shoes emojis. And that's what I'm like. And I'm like, Beeple, you son of a... And I'm like, okay, I got to mint this. So we learned very shortly after, in just the coming days, that it wasn't just a one-off mint, that there was a story being told here, because about a week later, the Wagmi-san opened up his shop again, and he was now minting backpacks. But before we could finish minting the 10 hours that he promised, he stopped at 7 because somebody was after him, and we found that out on Twitter. He's like, I have to run early. I'm so sorry. Somebody's after me. And so obviously the question is, who's after him? And then you read the bio on Twitter, and it says, it tells a story. And then at the very bottom, it says, and we don't want a repeat of what happened last summer. And we're like, what happened last summer? And so these are just the natural questions as humans you start to ask. And so what we've seen is over the coming weeks, each week on Thursday, there's a new, just like there's a new episode of a show on TV, there's a new plot advancement in the story. And everything they do that's story related ties into Web3. So early on, instead of getting airdrops, because, you know, people were getting airdrops in the NFT projects, we got an airdrop, but it wasn't called an airdrop. It was Wagmi-san in the story was being chased by villains, and he needed to store his materials and tools with people he could trust. And so he's like, I trust you, Grailed. Grailed is like what you call the community. And so he gave them the materials and tools. Now, obviously, that was literally an airdrop, but the way that it was wrapped up in that story, it just added that extra bit of like, okay, this is special, this is cool. And they've really done, that's just the very beginning couple months. It's unfolded in a wild ride so far. And most recently, last week, and go ahead.
No, continue.
Yeah, so most recently, last week, and there's a live stream of me and my two co-hosts for the Damn Show. We're on YouTube talking about 10KTF last Thursday, and we go to the website, and the three of us are on the website. We officially became part of the story as three captains in that universe. And that, I think, that's a first. That's never been done, where the literal community, and we knew this was going to happen. We knew at some point the community was going to become part of the story. But last week, the literal community members became part of the story in a very real way, where people had to pick one captain to go behind on their mission. And so, you know, it went from a celebration of like we're all three captains to we're kind of competing against each other now, and we have to win people's votes. And so it started turning into like a political campaign, and it was a surprise to all of us. And so I had I had to fly out, and instead of me packing a few days in advance, I'm now packing at the very last minute because I was making videos and content and like a political campaign.
That's very, very interesting, right? I think like when you're talking, there was like a bunch of questions coming to my mind. I'm just like stopping, and like I want to go about a few of those things. So I think 2-3 questions, right? Like first, I'm curious to so firstly, this is a great, like the whole game is about attention, right? Like fundamentally speaking, everything, every project, anything that you're doing is like you're trading on attention, like, and wherever you build attention is your leverage. And I think stories inherently capture that attention, and then when you are making that so much of a role play and sort of almost like a treasure hunt sort of a thing, people are obviously more involved, and then you are bringing those characters into the story itself, and I think that's a very, very great way to build community. I mean, ultimately that is what any project wants to do, is like you want people to be representatives of their projects, and no better way to like, this is the way you're basically not only recognizing them, but for anyone new person who's coming in, like they all of a sudden know that Atareh is this captain who is like part of the story, and like they've got like insane amount of loyalty from you now, and now you people who are follow your content also kind of knows about the project. So that's one very interesting aspect about it. So I have one other question related to like kind of to this is like, I'm curious, like how many people do have like how many such quest, quote unquote quest, or like projects that you would go on to and involve like yourself like so much with, right? Because it almost feels like now imagine like if every project tries to do this, right? And then it's a bit of a like, I maybe like just a thing that I feel is like maybe I might get, it's almost like a cult sort of a thing, right? Like you can be part of like one cult at a time or two cults at a time max, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? Like so
two is probably
just
pushing
curious,
it.
like how many people do you think like are into this aspect of like going through stuff like and kind of do that? I mean, like BAYC also has done something like this, like in a different, slightly different way, maybe not so elaborate, but I think involving people in that whole aspect. So one question is that like how many people do you think like or like one question is that, and the other thing is in terms of these narrative buildings, right? Like a lot of projects try to do that first level of narrative, which is like, okay, there is a website, there is a story that's coming up, and but I think there is no real progression to that story, or there is no continuation, plot thickening, involving different stakeholders. And is this a very niche thing? Like, do you think it's a very, or is it something that could be done at like scale too, for like products too? Like, for example, in that context, like, just to share some context in terms of what we have done is we've built a product, and like we are kind of making few amends to these products. But I think inherently, like if you look at our Twitter bio, it says like level up your NFT game, and like now we've started thinking about like how do we visualize this whole journey of a player who enters this game, almost like it's a fun little game that you're entering into this NFT world and like this crypto and Web3 world, and like how do we like create a journey, a path, a quest, a character journey for this person, and kind of thinking about storytelling. So I'm just kind of like genuinely curious from an executional standpoint too.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first question was how many projects can do this sort of thing, or
is it a niche basically?
Yeah. Is it a niche? And I think that I think a lot of projects are going to try to do this because, as we've seen in the past few months, a lot of projects, even the big ones, are now layering in storytelling as part of their project. You could even see it in Board Ape Yacht Club's or Yuga Lab's other side, where with the whole website, it's a 11-part story that they're going to be taking us through. And we know that 10KTF and Yuga Labs have some sort of a partnership because Wagmi-san, the Japanese man, his glasses were in the other side on that first trip, and it was specifically called out to that. So I imagine that there's definitely crosstalk between those two teams saying, here's how we did our story, and here's how you guys can do it for you. Now, is it a niche? It's a good question. I don't know if I would have the bandwidth or the care to put myself in another project like I have here. And I think there's a lot of elements to that, and I've thought a lot about that. I think a huge part of it is that how much stability is there in the project. And what I mean by stability is, I mean monetarily, like, are they good? And most projects are, right, by and large. I mean, but I think a deeper level, what I mean is the founders. Who are they? Why are they doing this? Are they going to be around a year from now, or are we going to start to see them lose motivation because, they thought we're going to do an NFT project and it ends up being successful, and we're like, oh, great. And when they actually get down to the execution level of it, do they actually want to do this? Are they even interested in it? Or are they going to slowly lose motivation and not care as much? And I think what I've seen is with 10KTF, and really the in-person events really drove home to me. The in-person events it is the most elaborate, immersive experience I've ever been to. Whether it was the big one in New York or the small one in LA, you were essentially transported to New Tokyo because they took a bar in Little Tokyo district in LA and they turned it into Wagmi-san's shop. And not in like a small way, in like a very like every detail, they changed the walls, they installed a bunch of things. It was so immersive. And then even more so with the Brooklyn event. And when you see that signals to you, even if you don't consciously realize it, that signals to you that, these people care and they're not here for just a couple years and then they're going to just go away. Like, they're here to execute at a very deep level. And so I think when you see those signals, you want to go deeper into that and say, there's going to be some stability here that I can build on top of, such that we get to a point where we were selected as captains because we're also helping create content for the ecosystem, not for any monetary reasons. We're still doing it just on our own. So I think that's the piece there, if that makes sense, or if you have any follow-up for that.
Yeah. So the other part of the question was about like, I think, so what I understood is, yes, it's a niche. It's something where you would be individually be involved, like maybe have a bandwidth for one or two such things in your life. but there are enough set of people, right? I think there can be enough ambassadors
Sure.
of different projects, like representing different things. And the other aspect of it you said is like whether the project is long enough for you to emotionally, time wise, invest into the project. And the kind of taking a bit of a turn from sort of storytelling to different topic. So there are a lot of these, like I think within the whole NFT subculture, like there has been a progression in terms of different things that has been happening. So largely, like, it was PFP driven. Then I think utility gaming, like all these different sub verticals are sort of coming up, and I think there are some like really technical use cases of NFTs I think are going to also like see the light, and they may not be even traded or in marketplaces so much, but I think will end up being in people's wallets. So in that context, like kind of what are the other sort of verticals, or like what sort of use cases are you sort of seeing for NFTs at large, and what are you most like excited about? Like,
It's a good question. I think as like a utility, and I'll go back to 10K just one more time. What I've seen is that because and maybe this is like a deeper thing that's happening across NFTs, but when you own an NFT and I own an NFT, and I've seen you in the Discord a bunch of times, and you've seen me in the Discord a bunch of times, there almost becomes like a brotherhood or a sisterhood amongst a few projects that you it's almost like a fraternity where if you're across overseas and you see somebody from the same fraternity or they recognize something, you guys have that automatic bond and shared understanding. And that shared understanding and bond, I think, is really powerful with NFTs, because it's not just like a bond that you created over like a TV show or a place that you lived. It's a bond that you've created over investment assets. So you have a financial stake in all of this as well. And so that as like a macro utility is something really interesting, and I'm really enjoying that, because when I went to NFT NYC, I met up with a bunch of people, some for the second time, some for the first time, from 10KTF, and the bond there, the friendship, the comfort level was just so immediate that I was like, this is rare, and I want more people to experience what this is with whatever, another NFT project, but something else. I think that's really powerful from like an actual utility standpoint of like here's an NFT, here's the utility. I think it's a good question. We've seen a lot of it. I mean, gaming is one of those things for sure. The interoperability aspect, I don't know how that's going to work in terms of practicality of it, but the interoperability aspect of that is really interesting. I think that's a big one. I'm not so sure about like music NFTs. I've heard that a lot about that, and I'm not actually entirely sure, because what I've seen is two things with music NFTs. I've seen that artists will sell music NFTs, so you have like a fraction of the overall song, but you don't actually get any of the masters of the song. You don't actually have any ownership of the copy or the IP. The artist still owns it, and so I feel like that's a really weird component. The second thing is that, and I asked like the platform this. It was Royale, I believe, that Blau is running.
yeah.
So their whole ethos is, community owned. We're going to go artists first, and communities are going to power up artists. But then they were taking on just a bunch of VC money that the community cannot actually. So the community cannot have ownership into Royale, but VCs can. But your whole ethos is about having people own things. And I understand there's a lot of laws that make it a little bit more difficult to own a company, being an accredited investor and all of that. But I just found there's a big disconnect between that. And I'm not sure how much people are going to be drawn to music NFTs. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know too much more about that. But that's kind of where I stand on that. And then I think the last piece I'll say is, I think the most powerful utility, and it's very basic, is it's proof of ownership for access. I think access at the end of the day is what NFTs will allow, whether it's gated things online or it's IRL events. I think when you go to NFT IRL events and you get that VIP feeling of like you go to the line and you're let in first, and like that as a human feels nice. Like I understand why people pay a lot of money to go VIP, whatever, get in first. And I think that aspect of it is only going to grow because humans love that exclusivity.
Yeah. So I think the element of like, so if I were to look at like these as like different subsegments, like the PFP, where the whole idea was sort of about like how do you create value out of this digital asset.
Yeah.
I think in that subsection of things, definitely some of the things which you touched upon, whether that is storytelling or that community or the feeling of like people coming together and co-experiencing certain things. And I think that plays a very big role, because essentially it's fundamentally about creating strong stories. Like why do we like Donald Duck or whatever, right? Like we as kids, like for generations, people have continuously seen these stories which meant something for them. And I think, but that connection was through this character. Now it's about like the macro story of this thing that has come up and how we have all come together towards it. I think that's also a very interesting story. Like, and then the experiences people would end up sharing. So I think within that sub community of PFPs, definitely people or projects who are going to differentiate themselves on this level, where they end up creating strong communities or a strong narrative around which people can kind of come together. And I think there are these other utilities of NFTs also, which are kind of coming up, and which I've also been kind of just keeping out an eye in terms of like what's happening in the space. And from a builder's perspective, like one very interesting thing which we are also working on, and which is something which is very exciting for us, is just using NFTs for its technology itself, like which is essentially a piece of information that lies in your wallet, which is probably yours, and with like maybe if you make that soul bound, sticks to your wallet and kind of has this information, right? So one interesting experiment what we've been kind of doing is so to give some context about sort of what we do and what we have done so far, is basically on Wall, like you kind of can search for any wallet and get a complete history of that wallet. And right now it is just NFTs. Now we are going like cross chain, cross asset. So what we're creating is an NFT which basically aggregates all the wallet information into that NFT. So, and it's a dynamic NFT which keeps updating based on activities that you do and sort of different things that you do. And using NFTs as a way to actually like recognize and reward different members. Like you said, like as Wagmison's story, as a part of that, there was the story about like him wanting to protect some assets and wanted to give that. Now that you've become a captain of this project, like now you're given like a Medal of Honor or some badge or something of that sort, right? Now that could be another NFT itself. And now that NFT on chain, now it's important. A lot of these things do happen in Discords where you're given roles, and like kind of I think it's important that these things come on chain, because then your reputation becomes composable to other communities too. So that's one of the interesting pieces which we've been working on, is creating an NFT which is dynamic, which aggregates all of your information and is a dynamic NFT. And the other element of it is like issuing these badges and kind of talking to different projects to inbuild that whole storytelling element, as well as how that is recognized on chain by issuing certain NFTs, which are like essentially rewards and recognitions for people. So like this is a very, very utilitarian, like I think it just becomes a way in which NFTs are being used, rather than it being a speculative thing or like something which you're investing in. So so just curious, like what's your thoughts on like these on-chain like recognitions and like this, like the storytelling element, and like how the whole NFTs itself kind of become a way for people to recognize and reward?
I think so. I mean, I think with a space where your reputation is 99, if not 100% online, right? And some of that lives on Twitter, right? So reputation could be like your Twitter bio or your followers or things like that. I think we are obviously going to move towards a world where we have more and more of our credentials on chain. And so if you say something, it'll be, or if you claim something, it can be backed up by on-chain. And I think what that specifically looks like, it's a great question. And I like that you guys are experimenting with that, with a version of that with NFT communities, because when you think about NFT communities, every community there, it becomes, it's a social circle. And within each social circle, there's people that play different roles, and people that have, like, the founders have, the very highest status, and it trickles down from there. And so I'm very curious to see how the mini societies within each of these discords and NFT communities get mapped on to wallets, because that's a very real aspect of it. It's arguably, if that element doesn't take hold in the NFT project, that mini society, then the project doesn't actually pick up traction. So it's like you have to ask, well, where is the value really? And I think it'd be interesting how that maps to on-chain badges. And then I'm curious to see if people start to default to that, to say, oh, who is this person? Let me check their on-chain. And look, oh, they have this wallet, which is like almost like a standard in the space of let's say whatever rank, whatever you want to call it. And then that becomes like something that people can even point to say, oh, well, check my wallet because look, I have this, this, and this, and so I know what I'm talking about, or I feel like I have an opinion that should be given a little bit more air. So yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. But I like that you guys are experimenting with that.
Yeah, and one thing which you touched upon is very important, right? Like, a lot of this is also off-chain information. So what we're trying to use here is like oracles and kind of. So what we've created is basically a data lake which has which has all the information which you want to have. So for example, right, like in case of Wagnisan, like in 10K TF project, like I would want to maybe give out reputation badges or like whatever, like as a part of that storytelling. Now they're doing certain badges which they would want to give out if they have spoken about, made content around these things. And I think so like once you set these filters, essentially there is a data lake which is which basically aggregates this information, which takes information from these external sources and uses oracles to kind of validate this information that this is right information, and then kind of based on that you kind of get these badges. So first part is like we're trying to do this a bit we are at a POC level, kind of putting them together and doing that. And I think the next step is for us to make this trustless, like use the decentralized stack and kind of make it it's a very interesting thing. Like I find, like, I think what you talk about storytelling and like the whole reward recognition, and the biggest problem essentially, and I think this is a problem which goes beyond just NFTs too, even for the dApps or applications or projects that are building, even DeFi for that matter. So any project who's building users, and I think Aave did like an amazing job at it, like with the whole Aavegotchi thing, like even though it's like pretty stupid, right? Like it's a ghost and whatever, but I think bringing in that element itself reduced a lot of user friction for people to like, okay, I understand it, I just need to take my ghost from here to here, right? Like, okay, whatever that means, but I understand that now I contextualize it in a different way. So I think there's a whole powerful element of using stories and narratives to make the user journey simpler, whether that's for an application like a Huddle, which is a Web3 Zoom, and they would want to say like, you're a power user, you're leveling up in this whole aspect, and like you can give these automated badges and all of these things. So this is something which we've been like really excited about, and like kind of building apart from like the core thing which we've built, which is basically on-chain wallet profiles and things like that. And so this is another use case which I found very interesting. So kind of going on to a different tangent. So in terms of this whole NFT space and like what's been like post the highs, like I think yesterday itself kind of saw this headline where like OpenSea volumes is like down to 1% or under 5% of their peaks, right? So there's been a lot of visitors going back to their dens, and then there are some people who are here. So what's your thoughts on like sort of how do you see this, or let's say the next 6 months to 1 year, and like maybe what do you think people who are still here could be looking at doing, or like people who have come and like just got a taste of it but like maybe bought at the highs, and like, so yeah, just generally like the bear market sentiment, and like what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, let me answer that, but I just marked a clip here because some background music started playing. Can you hear that?
No.
No, you can't. Oh, amazing. Okay, because there's like some speakers going, and I was worried that it's going to translate. But I've marked the clip so that you're able to cut it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bear market sentiment. I think there's for the people that bought on the highs. I mean, there's always somebody, and unfortunately, it was me in 2017 in some sense when it came to some altcoins. So I think you can kind of just hope that that project still sticks through it, but don't like get too attached. That's what I would say. If it does, great, but if not, like don't be down on yourself. I think the overall sentiment, it's really interesting because for me, I'm focusing on deepening my involvement in projects where I know there are builders that are going to be here for that next wave up, whether they're doing something with their current project or something else. I'm just aligning myself with that. And I think this is the best opportunity to get into the space, not to degen, flip, and mint, but to, if you're a builder, I think this is the time. If you need funding, there's still funding out there that you can access to, not immediately, obviously, but like over time as your reputation builds, to create something and to test it out in a lower stakes environment than what is the bull market. Because some of the best things are built here. So right now, I think it's a time to build. That's what bear markets are for. It's a narrative that we hear a lot. And I think that if you're looking to build, great time to get involved. If you're looking to degen, I mean, I wouldn't quit like your job or anything right now. Just to be straight up, I think, you could still have fun and get involved to learn the ropes and get the understanding and catch up on what a lot of people learned this past bull market, so that when the next phase does come, whatever that looks like, you at least know the people, or you have the signals so that you're able to stay ahead of the curve a little bit and really go into that. So that's what I would say to people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? I think even in terms of degening, it's like over the next few months is a good time to like get into some of these really good projects very cheap. Like I think bear market is when wealth is built, like when you kind of end up but unfortunately a lot of people don't end up having liquidity during the bear market, so it's important to maybe accumulate a bit of liquidity, and like 10K ETF, like the project you're talking about, and like maybe there were some of these projects which are on my radar, but at that point in time I didn't even have the liquidity to get into. And now I think thanks to the bear market we can get into some of these projects. So that's one aspect of it, right? Like, and the second thing which you spoke about in terms of building, like for example, right, like if this was the peak of speculation and happening, probably we wouldn't even have the time to sit together and have this conversation. So 100%, because there would be way too many signals, and then you start thinking about like, what if I miss the next degen mint that's going to happen literally at 10:30 a.m. and I was on a podcast and I missed it all, and then I have intense FOMO because my whole timeline is dancing. And 100%. And just to your earlier point, I wanted to quickly add that one of my co-hosts, she bought her mutant ape just a few weeks ago, and she used the time accordingly to be like, okay, I've wanted to get into this for a very, very long time. Now's the time. Got the liquidity, made it happen. Nice. I think so. That's like one really good opportunity. I mean, like even last. So what you said, something there was like very interesting to me. Just like you burned your hands in the 2017-18 cycle, and then you stuck through it, and like this is where you are now at. I think a similar kind of a journey would be there for a lot of people who got into NFTs. Because in the big picture, we are still quite early. Like I think in total, there's like 5 million active wallets. Like that's nothing. That's nothing in the big picture of things. So still, like whether that is new ecosystems that are developing L2s or even just projects beyond just NFTs that are coming up, I think there's huge amount of opportunity for people to kind of get involved into and kind of just stick through the phase to get to that next wave. And this is also something which has happened so much for the people who have stuck through 2018 cycles and were able to see the DeFi summer, were able to get into, have enough liquidity to get into the NFT summer. And I think there is a lot of value that can be generated for individually, also for people, if they kind of just are sticking and kind of learning and going about just being. And I think the whole storytelling of it kind of makes it easier for people to stick through to.
I also think that that's why NFT projects, when you actually think about it, NFT projects and altcoins in 2017, very similar, very similar phenomenon, where, just for the listeners, if they don't know, in 2017, you had people who drop a white paper and then post like an Ethereum address link and say, donate here, or send Ethereum here, and we will give you specific tokens because this is our vision of what we're building. It was a decentralized cloud computing, or this or that or that or that. And 99% of those were either scams or went to zero. NFTs, very similar in that, I'm sure there's scams, and most are probably going to go to zero still, but there's some real ones within all of that. In the 2017 cycle, there was Filecoin, and I believe Uniswap, if not the protocol, then the early phasing of the team was built around then as well, and a few others I can name. So I think the same thing is going to be true with NFTs, but I think that we got a lot more of a liking with NFTs because it's a lot more easier to digest, like you said, a ghost from one place to another, or like a cute animal, than it is like, here's 1,000 tokens. And you're like, okay, cool. I also think that it's much easier to wrap your identity around a photo than it is 1,000 tokens. And so when you can wrap your identity around it, you have much more group cohesion because I don't think people went to parties to be like, oh, you have 1,000 tokens of BST, me too. Like we're homies for life. But if you're like, oh, you have a board, if I have a board, we're homies for life. So I feel like NFTs were the natural step up to what we saw in 2017 with ICOs. And now we're in that down phase again, and we're going to have to just ride that out. And the gems that are supposed to shine will shine when this is all over.
And like what exactly to do in this space is to follow the right set of people. And Atareh has been doing an amazing job at like collating all this information and putting like some of the best content out there. So definitely go follow him on Twitter. And what's your handle, Atareh?
Atareh is Atareh.
Perfect. I think we'll just overlay that. And I think no, this was a very, very fun conversation, kind of just talking about like different elements of you as an individual and like us as this overall space that we are trying to co-create. Super happy to get different perspectives on. I think one of the things which you spoke about in terms of storytelling is like a great food for thought for us to even think about in terms of how we would want to approach that from world perspective. So I think all these conversations kind of have this butterfly effect of like, some things that come out of these things, and the whole idea about these conversations also is to create those serendipitous moments. So thanks for taking time out and being able to get on this podcast, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's funny you said serendipitous, because that's the exact word that I was came to my mind when you said butterfly effect. It's those in-person collisions and conversations that create serendipity, and serendipity itself. I'll end with this. I love the word, and I'm not sure if you know the backstory, but it's about I believe it's 3 princes in Sri Lanka, and one of them is their name is Serendip, and he was someone that always stumbled on like just great luck, and that's the etymology of the word. So I love the word itself, serendipity. I feel like if you look into that backstory, you'll appreciate that as well. And thank you for having me. I wanted to very quickly plug One thing I do a DAM show. It's called the DAM show. It's the Diamond Atareh Maybe Netta show. You can see the link in my bio on Twitter. And we talk about 10KTF and we talk about some other projects. We have an episode every Monday, and then Thursdays we do live streams. So if people are interested in 10KTF, that's probably a great place to jump in, and we'll answer some live questions, and you can learn a lot. So please check that out.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, man. It was lovely talking to you. Take care.
Likewise. You too. Bye.